So yesterday, when the news was that Feds were going to cut rates by 50 basis points, a friend of mine who used to be a trader posed this question to me. 10-year bond, Fed cuts rates by 50 basis point, 10-year bond yield goes from 3.65 to 3.71. What does that tell you? And I had an answer for him in terms of what I think it tells us, but let's get our friend Jim Iuorio's answer. He's the expert. He's also the host of the Futures Edge podcast, and he's a special contributor to wirepoints.org, as well as the proprietor of Brandt's Restaurant in Palatine. Jim, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So what is that? 50 basis point cut, 10-year bond yield goes from 3.65 to 3.71. What does that tell us? What's your answer?
Okay, I think there's a few answers, and it's nuanced. The most obvious one that's kind of a slap in the face is the market is telling us that there could be a resurgence of inflation, and I believe that's valid too. And I think that genuinely could happen. But there's a couple other elements that could exacerbate the move too. There's been a lot of traders who have had on what was called the flattening trade, meaning they're long one part of the curve and short the other. And I don't mean to get too wonky here, but if they have to head to the exit, sometimes it makes for odd movements. But you know what I think is an underappreciated element of why 10-year yields are going higher? We are looking at an election coming up with two profligate spenders, one tremendously so and one, a little bit to be determined. If they keep spending the way they are, one, inflation will resurge, but just from the notion of how many bonds they're going to have to sell the Treasury in the long end to raise money for the ridiculous spending efforts will force long end yields up. So I am actually long that trade. I think 10-year yields are going higher, not lower, despite the fact they're embarking on this easing cycle. But to your point, I definitely believe that there's an inflation element to it, that they're about to spark it again, which would be tremendously stupid. I realistically think that Jay Powell should have came out and said, we believe that this new rate after 50 basis points is still a restrictive weight, and what we're trying to do to the economy is to slow the slow, not stimulate anything, because that could be inflationary, and we're all sick to death of inflation, and that could be a political time bomb.
Yeah, to my reaction was, that's a more detailed answer than mine was, of course, because you know this better than I do, but it's politics. The market's saying this is politics. It's an expression of knowledge that this is a house of cards.
I think there's no question there's a political element to this. Even if Jay Powell doesn't even know there's a political element, when you have senators like Elizabeth Warren getting people to sign a letter sending him saying, we need a 75 basis point cut now, which is obvious because I'm pretty sure 10 minutes earlier than that, she was talking about how great Bidenomics was working and how great the economy was.
Right.
So why in the heck would we need a 75 basis point cut now? But to think that there's a political element of this is completely reasonable. Everybody does what they do to protect themselves. And if he thinks that a new administration is going to fire him, sure, perhaps he's being a little bit political. I think there's no question that that's worth discussing.
He also said the cut was the beginning of a process to move the Fed away from a restrictive monetary policy, but added that the Fed policy is not on any preset course. Oh, good. That's what we like, unpredictability. We're not going to be restrictive, but don't say quantitative easing. We'll figure it out. We don't know.
You said the magic word there, quantitative easing, which is what I'm going to be looking for, because I just mentioned how many bonds they have to sell to fund their stupid spending. And if there comes a time where they start driving long-end rates up just by virtue of the amount of bonds, and the Fed comes back in to try to lower long-end rates, that's when I think it really hits the fan. That's when you want to be long gold, real estate, Bitcoin, if you believe in that stuff, things that are dollar proxies, because I do think we're coming to what could be a very, very difficult time. Over the last 3 years, we have spent money like drunken sailors to the tune of accumulating $1 trillion of debt every 85 days in a time when the economy was supposed to be good. Now, to put that in perspective, that was always available to any Fed and any president forever. You could make an economy look better by just spending and spending and spending. We didn't do that because we were worried about the ramifications of weakening our dollar. They don't seem to be as worried about that right now, and I think that there's a solid chance that comes back and bites us with inflation.
Yeah, you just mentioned Bitcoin. I don't know if you saw President Trump was at a bar in New York yesterday. He didn't, because he doesn't drink, but he bought a sandwich, and he used Bitcoin for the first time.
I think it's fantastic. So that is a big element of this election, is that both Trump and RFK have spoke at Bitcoin conferences, have told those Bitcoin faithful. I spoke at a Bitcoin conference actually on the stage right before RFK back in June, and one of the speakers said to the crowd of thousands, how many of you is Bitcoin your number one voting issue? And I expected, 10% of the people to raise their hands. Everybody but me raised their hands.
Really?
So these people are fervent about Bitcoin, and they, I believe, it was a brilliant political move. I don't even know if Trump knows what Bitcoin even is, but if he thinks it's going to get all these voters, yeah, I'm all in. Bitcoin it is, baby.
Well, instead of buying burgers with Bitcoin for everybody, maybe you should have bought their car insurance for them with Bitcoin, because the Bureau of Labor Stats is out. And again, why people are feeling the squeeze. Car insurance prices, not just in Springfield, Ohio, car insurance prices nationally up 55% since Biden and Harris took office.
Yeah, and this, by the way, I keep once a week I put out a thing explaining how the inflation was a policy decision. The inflation wasn't like, oh my gosh, where did this inflation come from? The inflation was calculated. They took advantage of a seizing up supply chain to add $7 trillion into the economy to specifically spur inflation. Now, people might ask, why in the world would they do that? Because an inflationary environment is the only way these excessively debtor government entities, including the federal government and including the state that I'm standing in right now, that's the only way they can possibly manage the ridiculous debt is if a ton more money is injected into the system and we inflate away. It's called monetizing the debt. They're essentially paying the debts they owe with cheaper dollars. Now, the only way that works in the medium term is if these debtor government agencies are smart enough to understand what a golden opportunity it is to change their ways. Spoiler alert. Not only do they not change their ways, they're like, whoa, money's coming in, let's spend even more. So it did not work and will not work.
Yeah, actually, J.D. Vance mentioned this in his sit-down with Tucker, talking about his concern about a real debt spiral like this country has never seen because of the profligacy of fiscal policy and the the manipulations by central planners at the Fed.
Yeah. So I want people to know that a currency crisis and a debt crisis are the worst types of any sort of financial crisis. Like when the last time it happened in Caracas, Venezuela, the feral cat and the rat population disappeared because they became a food source. I'm not trying to be dramatic or hyperbolic.
Yeah.
They're eating cats.
That's
They're
been
eating
debunked, Jim. That's been debunked.
Yeah,
The Springfield mayor said so. Yeah, okay.
If someone says eating cats, we all have to drink. I thought. But
yeah, right.
No, but this is it's a concern. Is it a big concern in the United States right now? No, it's not, because there's not a real currency that could step in and be what the dollar is. But is it a medium to long-term concern? Of course it is. Nobody has the reserve status forever, and always the hubris that comes with having the reserve currency status usually brings about the nonsense behavior that destroys your currency. That's why I've been telling people for 2.5 years, well, people, I'm not making any recommendations, but own gold, own real estate, own things that are going to go higher when the dollar goes lower. And guess what? The dollar's gone lower.
Well, so this rate cut is supposed to spur investment and
people are going to take out car loans
and buy houses and so on and so forth. But is that real? I mean, what's credit? I mean, aren't credit spreads going to, based on what you're predicting, aren't credit spreads going to widen? Is this really going to be incentive for positive risk taking behavior?
Probably not. Probably, I think he thinks rates are still restrictive at this level. What you said about credit spreads is interesting, because credit spreads are very, very tight right now. But I personally think that's a function. Remember, I said before about $7 trillion additional dollars being injected into the system. Now, some of those have been removed, but by my estimation, most analysts, there's still probably about an extra $2 to $3 trillion in the system above trend. Now, that money ends up in weird places. Like only when there's excess money are you sick of getting 5% on your 2-year Treasury yield, so you go out and get 6% on a high yield corporate. I'm just making up numbers. So that's a reflection of that. I don't think the fact that credit spreads are tight is an indication that all is well, which, by the way, I do think when those start to widen, I put that HYG ETF on was one of my charts up that I have in my desk every day, because when those start to widen, when that starts to go down, that could be the signal that burning timbers are beginning to fall from the ceiling. The house is on fire.
Yeah.
Does any of that make sense or no?
Yeah. Well, that's exactly what I was thinking. That's why I wanted to get your perspective on it. I mean, it's all of this, happy talk in response to the rate cut, but the actual reaction from those who know was much more muted.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I think, again, I will reiterate again that he thinks he wants to keep rates in restrictive area, and he thinks this is still restrictive. At least that's what he's saying, unless he sees what I think is possible, and that's that the labor market has actually been trash for a year, and every statistic we get from the BLS is either nonsense incompetence or it's nefarious, trying to make us believe that there's a stronger labor market than there is. For the last 18 months, second and third jobs, part-time side hustle jobs are going through the roof, while career jobs, full-time jobs are going down. Also, government, healthcare, education jobs are going through the roof because of that government spending we're talking about, and private sector jobs are essentially stagnant. So for someone to look at the labor market and think it's good and strong, maybe we don't have 5% unemployment because we had a labor shortage and there's a little bit of labor hoarding still going on. But I think the labor market is trash and has been for a year, and I think Jay Powell knows that as well.
Let me tell you a little story about Illinois, something closer to home that will impact all Illinois families. Get your reaction to it. A few years ago, Governor Jelly Belly, in his infinite wisdom, enacted a clean energy law, like all the lefties are doing, mandating the closure of all coal and natural gas-fired power plants by 2045. It also required a number of gas-fired facilities to be shuttered by 2030. Some people predicted that if you reduce the supply of energy, costs are going to go up. Imagine that. Oh, gee, I wonder how it turned out.
Who didn't predict that?
Yeah, well, you'd be surprised. Most of the General Assembly payment. So what's happening now? Payments to power generators in return for their promise to produce to their capacity when demand is highest are set to soar more than 800% and will raise all electric bills beginning next June. The charge is embedded in the rates users pay for power. It's in addition to the cost for the electricity itself. It's akin to an insurance premium. In the Northern Illinois territory served by ComEd, average residential electric bills will increase by $15 a month beginning in June due to this effect alone. That's according to ComEd. The increase will be significantly more pronounced for single-family homes than for multifamily buildings. All told, ComEd residential bills will rise by 10.5% due to that charge alone. Get prepared for the worst beginning in mid-2026. Morgan Stanley projects this insurance-like charge we're talking about that's going up 10.5% could be up 2,200% higher than it is today, inflating average monthly ComEd residential bills by more than $35 compared with current charges, and again, more pronounced with single-family homes. And on and on and on. It turns out that arbitrarily reducing energy capacity and thus supply increases cost, and it's going to be visited on Illinois families.
There are many brilliant economic analysts that I know who literally think that the single most indicator of an advanced and abundant society is how much energy is available at cost to every individual. This is a huge thing. But when I hear the things that they do, then this is a question I'm going to ask to you, because is this run-of-the-mill stupidity, incompetence, or is this nefarious? And because all the vectors seem to point the same way. Like if they're supposed to go right on an issue, they go left. They don't go a soft right. They go exactly opposite of the right thing to do. Now, if you want to usher in your new fairy dust energy policies, whatever, I'm not sure what things are supposed to run on. If you put gentle tax breaks in place to kind of provide incentives to go that way, that's fine. But to have these victims where you're going to disrupt markets and drive up costs like that you're literally putting people into economic peril. And I personally think they're doing it on purpose, because then they were like, well, you guys have all these problems. Guess who's going to solve them? I think, it used to be that Rahm and Nancy Pelosi said never let a crisis go to waste. I think that's morphed into let's create a crisis and ride in on a white horse. And I know that's every time in my life I think I'm too cynical, I find out about 2 months later I'm not cynical enough. I'm curious to get your opinion. Do you think it's nefarious, or do you think they're stupid?
I think there are many people that are stupid who go along with the nefarious because they don't understand what's happening. That's most of the Illinois electorate, certainly in Chicagoland. It's definitely nefarious. You're right about the control issue. You just have to add. You're not being cynical enough. Again, you have to add in the kleptocratic angle too. This is also, this is industrial policy and back scratching and feather bedding in exchange for campaign contributions and support and so forth. No different than, well, golly gee, isn't there a trial going on right now related to ComEd corruption in Mike Madigan's office? But pay no attention to that. We've never been here before. I mean, honestly, you cannot be. You're still too much of a wild-eyed optimist, Jim.
That could be right.
Honestly,
yes, and like foreign wars, that money doesn't wind its way back into federal lawmakers' pockets either. You know what I mean? Come on, we are not cynical enough, people. It is time to wake up.
Jim Iuorio, host of the Futures Edge podcast, special contributor to WirePoints, wirepoints.org, and also, of course, the proprietor of Brant's in Palatine. Jim, thank you.
Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you, and he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's like a hot, steaming cup of information to start your day. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Are you confused by all the wild campaign